Okay, guys, so now we are on chapter 23 of October Sky. And just to rehash a few little points from chapter 22. Last time we realized that Jim has now gone off to college. He did get his college scholarship. We heard that Buck Trent and Valentine got married, but now Buck has actually gone off to Detroit to build cars. We find that Mr. Fuller has basically run out of town, the superintendent, and a new one has come in. Mr. Boondini. Sad thing is, Homer Sr. finds out that there's going to be a 20% cut in pay for all miners. A lot of miners are also losing their jobs and having to leave town. So some sad developments to be predicted, or which were predicted by Mr. Dubonnet, if you'll remember earlier in the book. And we see a lot of people upset. We see Pookie show up again in the book, the one that held a grudge against Sonny for what happened to his dad years before, even though it wasn't Sonny's fault. And Pookie pitches a fit when they're launching their rockets. And at the very end, all of a sudden we see that some bullets are shot into Homer's house. They have not seen who did it. They have some suspicions. One great thing that happens is their rocket OC-25 takes off and flies higher than any rockets have flown, and it flies a total of 8,500 feet. And then we find they also discover, when their rocket lands on an area in the woods, they discover a big area where ginseng is being grown. Very valuable substance used in many supplements. I know a lot of people take that from memory, and it's still very valuable now to collect ginseng. And so, also, because we are seeing that Homer's equations are turning out to be correct, he finds a lot of people impressed with him, including the principal, Mr. Turner, who confronts him and Miss Riley and tells them that they are actually going to be able to go to, or the BCMA is going to be able to go to the county fair in March. And which shows that Mr. Turner has a lot of confidence now in Sonny, that he's allowing that to happen. And he even says that he has got so much confidence that he and the principal at Welch High School have actually made a bet as to who can win the science fair. So many exciting things that go on. So now we are going to start on page 359, and we are going to read chapter 23. Mom and Dad looked at the hole in the wall and then at the little crater in the window pane and talked quietly about what it would take to fix the damage. The bullet had been accompanied by the sound of screeching tires, so apparently whoever had shot at us had taken off down the valley. A little plaster and paint will take care of it, Dad said of the hole in the wall. There's glass at the Tipple carpentry shop. I'll get McDuff to cut us a pane. Mom considered the upholstery of the chair. The bullet had left a ragged tear. I'll scissor off the threads. You won't be able to tell it. I couldn't believe their calm. I was shaking with both anger and apprehension. Somebody had shot at us. Let's call Tag, I demanded. He'll figure out who did it. Dad looked at me as if I'd just crawled out from under a stump. If it wasn't Pookie Suggs, it was one of those men who hang around him and drink their courage out of a fruit jar. He's talking about moonshine. Tag, we'll just leave him out of this. Wouldn't want to see him get hurt. Mom silently swept up the glass into a dustpan. At her order, I fetched the vacuum cleaner for her, and she ran it underneath the window to make certain she got the tiniest shards. This so the cats wouldn't get them in their paws. Then she put a piece of tape over the hole in the window. Dad went down the basement and brought back a can of putty and patted it over the hole in the wall. After it dries, I'll sand and paint it, he said, standing back and observing his work critically. You won't even notice it's there. When Mom finished tidying up the living room, she came into the living room and planted herself in front of Dad, who had retreated to another chair and reopened his paper. Homer, we need to go to Myrtle Beach, she announced. It was a bolt from out of the blue. Dad looked up from his paper. We are going, he said. Frowning, miner's vacation. Remember how all the miners go on vacation on the same week? And I mean before that, she said. We can leave this Saturday, stay Sunday, and come back on Monday, she said. The mine will get along without you for that long. Dad was still mystified. Why do we need to go to Myrtle Beach now? Mom put her hands on her hips. I'm going to buy a house there. It was one of the few times I'd ever seen Dad flustered. His paper deflated in his lap. Why do we need a house in Myrtle Beach? It's not for us. It's for me. That's odd. I just need you to come and sign the papers. They won't sell it to me without your signature. Elsie, we couldn't possibly afford to buy a house in Myrtle Beach or anywhere else. So I do want you to make a note there that she wants Homer to go with her to Myrtle Beach because she wants him to sign papers on a house for not them, but her. Elsie, we couldn't possibly afford to buy a house in Myrtle Beach or anywhere else. I repeated that line, I know. Mom pulled a small black book out of her apron pocket and tossed it in his lap. That's my savings account over at Welch. For the last 20 years, you've given me your paycheck every month and depended on me to pay all the bills. Well, I have done that, but I've also invested what I could in the stock market. Remember we talked about that earlier? I could buy 2 houses if I wanted to. Wow, that's a lot. She has saved a lot of money. Dad opened the book and looked it over with his good eye. He turned the pages until he got the last one that had writing in it. My goodness, Elsie, where did you get all this money? I told you, the stock market. Stock market like in New York? Mom nodded. My broker's in Bluefield. He's been calling me all these years while you're at work. Dad struggled to make sense of the news. What stocks did you buy, coal and steel? Mom laughed heartily. Homer, please, give me some credit. No, I paid attention to what worked with the boys, like Band-Aids. I bought a ton of stock from the company that made the best ones. Mom had passed Dad's grasp of reality. Well, I always figured after retirement. I can't wait until then, Mom said sadly. Anyway, you'll work here until you drop. Not me. I'll be at Myrtle Beach. Dad was shocked. You're leaving me? Let's say I'm setting up our retirement house in advance. I'll come back here for holidays or when you really need me. But what about the boys? Jim's gone. I've got plenty of money to pay Sonny's way to college if that's what he wants. I'll stay until the day he leaves. Guys, that's odd. I don't think I've ever heard anybody do that before. I thought that was odd the first time I ever read the book. So, again, she's wanting to buy a house. Remember, she saved up a lot of money when she put stock into Band-Aids 20 years earlier. So she is wanting to buy this house, and she needs Homer to come with her. Dad still couldn't make sense of it. But what would the people in Colwood say? My mother's answer startled us both. Homer, she answered sweetly, I don't give a hoot what they say. During our BCMA meeting in the Big Creek Auditorium the next morning, I kept interrupting Billy, sure that my news was more important than whatever it was he was trying to say. I told the boys all about the shooting, concluding, it broke out the window, went through Dad's chair, and dug a big hole in the far wall. It was only a slight exaggeration. I left out Mom's Myrtle Beach announcement. That still wasn't real to me. What kind of bullet was it, Odell asked. A .22. Mom dug it out of the wall. A .22? Odell laughed. That's a pop gun. Well, it came that close to Dad's head, I said, pushing 2 fingers together. I was miffed that Odell took the shooting so lightheartedly. Billy finally managed to get his news in edgewise during my continuing elaborations. Did you hear Miss Riley's sick? Some kind of cancer. You'll remember in the last chapter it mentioned that he was noticing she was getting weaker. I stopped talking, my mouth hanging open. I felt as if I had been turned upside down. What are you talking about? I demanded. Mrs. Turner told Emily Sue. Emily Sue told me. Everything suddenly fell into place. Since Christmas vacation, Miss Riley had stopped standing during class, teaching instead from her chair behind her desk and asking one of us boys to come up and perform her experiments. Once in February, when snow covered the ground, she had left class and hadn't returned. Mr. Turner came to the classroom to tell us to finish reading the chapter we were on and to be quiet. He gave no explanation for Miss Riley's absence. He looked pale as if he'd seen something that frightened him, and none of us could imagine anything that could scare Mr. Turner. In physics class that day, I tried not to stare at Miss Riley, but I couldn't help it, and she caught me at it more than once. She looked wan, and her eyes were puffy. After class, she made me stay behind to talk to her. It seemed like you were 1,000,000 miles away, she said. I resisted asking her about her cancer. It had been ingrained in me by my mother to never poke my nose into anybody's business. If Miss Riley wanted me to know, she would tell me. I was thinking about the science fair, I said. That was at least partly true. It had crossed my mind. I still didn't know exactly what I was going to display or how I was going to display it. I've been meaning to talk to you about the fair, she said. You know, only one name can go into an entry. You put all the boys on your club down on the form. I changed it. You're the one. But all of us work on our rockets, I protested. I guess I'd look pretty bad if it was just me at the fair. I thought about Quentin's hope to be recognized by someone enough to get money for college. You'll represent us at the fair, she said firmly, because you're the one who knows the most. Quentin could do it, I said. He knows as much as I do. Maybe, she smiled, but you know Quentin, he'd try too hard, probably lose the judges with his vocabulary. So you do need to make note that even though Homer thought they all would be going to the science fair, it is just going to be him because only one person can go. And it really is well-deserved that it would be him because he's the one that started the group. And in the first place, he was the one that was most ambitious about it. And then she finally says, when I just stood there dumbly watching her, she lost her smile and said, I presume you've heard I'm sick. She had dropped it on me like 10 tons of coal. That's a simile. Yes, I blurted out, what's wrong? She began to teach me. What I have is Hodgkin's disease. It's a form of cancer that attacks the lymph nodes. So you do need to mark that Hodgkin's disease is what she has. And it is a form of cancer that attacks the lymph nodes. Make sure you make a point of that. She took my hand and placed it on her neck. This is where I first noticed that I had swelling. Feel that lump? That's one of the places where it is. Y'all know you have lymph nodes here. And I know when I go to the doctor for a physical, they always feel around on my neck to make sure that there's no swelling. And I've known of women that had to have their lymph nodes removed. I've been tired the whole school year, so I knew something was wrong. The doctors ran tests until they were certain what I had. I drew my hand away, frightened at touching such an awful thing inside her. I didn't know anything about cancer except it killed you. But then I remembered Dad had survived his colon cancer. Maybe Miss Riley could survive this Hodgkin's thing too. Are you going to be all right? She put an elbow on her desk and cradled her head in her palm. She raised an eyebrow and looked into my eyes. I don't know. Hodgkin's disease can go into remission. That means I'll still have it, but I won't be sick. Right now, I'm holding my own. That sounds hopeful. Is there an operation? No, nothing can be done. The doctor said to just stay as healthy as I can, get plenty of sleep, eat whatever I want, that kind of thing. The worst thing is I won't be much help to you on the science fair. After a day of teaching, I just can't keep my eyes open. You're going to have to prepare for it by yourself. Can you do that? I didn't know if I could, but I said, yes, ma'am, anyway. The bell sounded for the next class, and she waved me away. Keep this to yourself, she said. I yes ma'am'd her again and hurried down the hall as the last few students slipped inside their classrooms. I went past Mr. Turner's office. The last thing any tardy student wanted to do. He saw me, but said nothing, even nodded at me. His mouth set in a grim line. I guess he knew where I'd been. Sonny, I just got told by the union I can't work on your rockets no more, Mr. Caton said on the black phone. We're out on strike as of tomorrow. So notice that, guys, that Mr. Caton has said he can't work on the rockets. I was stunned. Did you finish my stuff? I asked him. He was supposed to be working on Op 25 plus a variety of nozzles, casements, and nose cones for display at the science fair. Nope, Pharaoh put us to work on hurry-up mine projects after he heard about the strike. How long is it going to last? About 24 hours, Dad said, coming through the foyer. It doesn't have a leg to stand on. Mr. Caton overheard Dad. Your dad's wrong, Sonny. This is no wildcat strike. Union headquarters is behind it. It's going to be a long one. I told Mr. Caton goodbye and then went to Dad, who had taken his paper to his easy chair, now moved away from the window. Don't start with me, he warned. I didn't cause this strike and I can't end it. But the machine shop is open. Caton or anybody else who wants to can work. He can't fight the union. Well, apparently neither can I. Dad, I need your help. I need to be ready for the science fair next week. I've got to have the stuff Mr. Caton was building for me. He kept his good eye on the paper, the other one tightly closed. A year ago, the town had cheered his bravery. Now, when things were tough, a lot of people said he was just a mean old one-eyed man. Sorry, little man, but I can't let the union get away with striking over nothing. I reported the situation to the BCMA the next morning. We talked things over and hatched a plan. It was risky, but it was all I could think to do. The machine shop was unlocked that night, as it was every night, and Sherman was waiting for me when I arrived on my bike. We opened the front door and switched on the fluorescent lights, which blinked on, bathing the rows of lathes and shapers and drill presses in a harsh blue-green glare. I found Mr. Caton's lathe and set up a piece of bar stock in it as I had seen him do. I got a cutting tool and put it in the special jig he had fashioned for our nozzles. I turned the lathe on and it whirred up to speed. My first cut was serviceable, but when I tried to make the interior angled cut, the tool wobbled and jammed. Dang it, I muttered in frustration. I stopped the lathe and pulled out the bar and threw it on the concrete floor. Sherman picked up the bar and pondered the wounded piece of steel. I didn't realize this was so hard. I wiped the sweat off my forehead with a bandana. Neither did I admitted. I changed to a fresh tool and went at it again. I got the first cut, but again, when I started cutting the interior angle, the bar worked its way out of the jig, and the tool dug in and broke. An hour had passed, and all I had to show for it were 2 ruined pieces of steel. This was when the shop door opened, and in came Mr. Caton. He crept inside, holding his finger to his lips. I wanted to hug him, but of course I didn't. He inspected our poor results. "You done pretty good," he whispered. "Yeah, that interior cut's a booger. Why don't you boys go on home? Not a word to anybody, okay? So make a mark that Mr. Caton has come in to save the night." And that was fine by us. Sherman and I sneaked out the door into the cool, damp night. I had backed past the clubhouse and the big store and across the bridge and through the silent darkness. As I approached the line of little frame houses on both sides of the creek, I came upon a knot of men gathered on and around Pookie's porch. Others sat on the hoods of trucks parked across the road. "Homer's boy," I heard somebody say. And I put my head down and pedaled faster. I heard a screen door slam behind me and my heart thumped as I heard footsteps, but then they stopped. I pedaled on. A car came up behind me and then swerved in front, stopping alongside the road. I recognized the 3 boys who got out. They were all sons of unemployed miners, including Pookie's son, Calvin. Calvin was one of the boys who had made a practice of beating me up in grade school every time there was a strike. Well, those days were over as far as I was concerned. There were too many of them to fight, so I pedaled at them, then jumped off my bike and scrambled out of the streetlight and up the hillside. There was a path there that led to the dirt road that ran to the Colwood School, and I figured I could hide in the darkness. Once on the road, I dodged into some tall weeds and huddled there until I heard them run past me. "Sonny," they called, "we just want to talk." I was too smart to fall for that. After a few minutes of silence, I worked my way back down the path, picked up my bike, and darted behind the houses to another path and made my way home. I crawled in bed with only a few hours before I'd have to get up and catch the school bus. It took me a while to get to sleep, and when I did, Mom and Dad and Miss Riley and Mr. Caton and Calvin Suggs alternately intruded into my dreams. Nothing seemed right, the world askew. So do make a note of that on the way home from the machine shop, Sonny was chased by Calvin, which was Pookie's son, and some of the other boys whose dad had lost their jobs in the mine. The newspaper said the strike at Colwood was just one of many across the county. Since the UMWA was notorious for lacking strike funds, a lot of families were facing a potentially desperate situation. The Salvation Army pitched in as best it could, and commodity food was delivered by the state. But I heard my mother saying across the fence to Mrs. Charitz that she was afraid people, even in Colwood, might soon go hungry. So what's happening, guys, is the guys are having a strike, but the union is not supplying them any extra money to buy food. So a lot of these people that normally would be working, but they can't work because they have to strike, are going without food. So Sonny's mom is very worried about them. Mom helped to organize the effort, but did not go on the delivery rounds. She knew the people would resent her if she did. Since it was a political season and Senators Kennedy and Humphrey were crisscrossing the state running for president, the glare of national scrutiny was settling on West Virginia. A lot of people in the state resented the fact that television reporters were flooding in and sending back reports about how ignorant, poor, and helpless everybody was in West Virginia. Both Senator Kennedy and Senator Humphrey thought they had the solution for West Virginia. Active assistance from the federal government in the form of free food, with federal government jobs to follow. If West Virginia agreed to vote for one or the other of the men, food was apparently going to come into the state in dump truck loads. When Humphrey was asked what was to become of the unemployed miners, he said they would be retrained, which got a big round of applause from his audience. Retrained for what, I wondered, watching television at Roy Lee's house. Retrained miners, Roy Lee's mother laughed from the sink where she was washing dishes. I'd like to see that trick. So if y'all don't get it, of course, when people run for president, they go from state to state because they want to win the votes of the people in each state. And as many people do, they promise things to the people, of course, if you'll vote for them. So with all the things going on in West Virginia, the coal mines starting to lose business, people out of jobs, they feel this is their opportunity to talk to people in West Virginia and get their vote. Dad could hardly stand to read the newspaper anymore. I came up from the lab just as he threw down the paper on the kitchen table. The union will never come off this strike if they think all this help is coming their way. Are you ready to go to Myrtle Beach, Mom asked. Next week, he said grumpily. That's what you said last week. I've got to stick around for the negotiating. Nobody's negotiating. I went upstairs and closed my door and lay down on my bed. Daisy Mae joined me in the crook of my arm. My stomach gave me a twinge and I felt nauseated. I was feeling sick to my stomach a lot lately. Everything seemed to be piling up on top of me. Spring brought rain, and in 1960 everybody was worried about flooding. The problem was that rainwater collected behind the slack dumps up the hollows. Usually the company bulldozed the slack dams open. So what they mean is when the slack, the slack fields, when the slack would pile up, it would kind of make a dam that would block the water. But during a strike, that wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to be bulldozing the slack dams open. So he woke up one Saturday morning to see a shallow flood coming down the road past the mine. It continued on down the valley all the way to the big store. It wasn't so deep I couldn't bike through it, but I was soaked by the time I got to Mr. Caton's house. I went around to his back door and knocked, looking around to see if anybody had seen me. Mr. Caton appeared and furtively handed me the nozzles and nose cones in a cloth flour sack. The casements are in the alley behind the shop, stacked with regular tubing stock, he said. I nodded. Roy Lee would pick them up the next day and hide them in his back seat. So in a way, guys, the reason that's happening is Mr. Caton really isn't supposed to be working. And so it's okay by Homer for him to be working, but because of the strike, he's kind of having to sneak and do this work for them. On my way back home, Calvin Suggs and his two buddies plunged off his porch and came after me, splashing in their bare feet across the road. They almost got me, but I swung the sack over my head and made them duck. It kept them at bay until the slack slipped out of my hand and went sailing into the creek. I jumped off my bike and knocked Calvin down with a solid fist to his chest. Astonished, he sat down in the flooded road and watched while I plunged into the swirling, muddy water. The flood nearly swept me off out from under me, my feet out from under me, but I kept flailing, frantically reaching down to feel the bottom of the creek. All I felt were rocks, mud, and cold water. When I clambered out empty-handed, I walked right up to him and punched Calvin again. He went down his nose, spraying blood. The other two boys rushed up. I started swinging at them too, and they scattered. When Calvin got up and tried to grab me, I elbowed him in the ribs, and he staggered back. What the heck's wrong with you, he gasped, wiping his bloody nose with the back of his hand. He left, his eye was swelling up. You made me lose my nozzles and nose cones. Your rocket stuff? Yes, you moron, my rocket stuff. So make a note of that when Calvin and the boys approached him trying to fight them off, he lost his rockets and nozzles that Mr. Caton had made for him in the flood. Let's see. The three Union boys and I stood in the swirling waters coming down the road and looked at one another. Calvin was definitely going to have a black eye. Calvin, what the crap are you doing? Pookie called from his porch. Looks like little Sonny's got your boy's measure, Pook. One of the miners sitting on his porch guffawed. Dang you, Calvin. Smack 'em good." Calvin ignored his father. "I'm sorry you lost your rocket stuff," he told me, truly contrite. That contrite means he's very sorry for what he did, that he's very deeply sorry, that he means it. We just wanted to talk to you." So now Pookie remembers still being a jerk, but Calvin is not trying to cause trouble. But because of all the times that Calvin would pick on Sonny when they were younger, he doesn't believe him. Says, "I didn't believe him. I balled up my fist. Come on, let's get it over with." "When the creek goes down, we'll help you look for your stuff," he said, running his hand through his wet hair. I finally saw that there was no fighting him. I looked at the creek and its swift water. "No need to. It's gone, thanks to you." "Calvin!" "Shut up, Paul." Calvin helped me pick up my bike and then held on to it. "Sonny, when you get out of here and go live at Cape Canaveral, could you maybe help us get jobs?" Wow. Look at that. The other boys nodded, hope written on their wet faces, their long hair down in their eyes. "It'll be a while before I'm down there," I said. "Calvin, let go of my bike." "That's okay. We'll be here or in the Army. You'll be able to find us." I rode thoughtfully away. Another fragment of the known world gone. So in other words, everything just seems strange to him now. Everything, nothing is like it was before. You know, the mind was flourishing. Of course, Pookie couldn't stand him. Calvin didn't like him because Pookie, his father, didn't like him. But now all of a sudden he's seeing a humble side of Calvin that's looking to him for help. And the mind is in bad shape. People are losing jobs. This is not the Coalwood that Sonny's grown up in, so it's kind of sad to see what's taking place. The next day, Mom said she heard a light knock on our front door, and when she opened it, she saw Calvin running off. There was a wet, dirty sack on the porch. Inside it were my nozzles and nose cones. So you need to make note of that Calvin found them like he said he would, and he put them on the porch. The next Thursday afternoon, Mom drove me over the mountain to the McDowell County Science Fair in Welch. The Buick was loaded down with the panels, posters, and rocket hardware of my fair exhibit. I had decided to title my entry, "A Study of Amateur Rocketry Techniques." The other boys followed in Roylie's car and helped me carry my hardware up to Welch High School gymnasium, which sat on the side of a steep hill. Mr. Turner had given us the afternoon off from school. Except for Mom, we were on our own. Miss Riley was out sick. Nervously, we set up the display, which consisted of a 3-hinged fiberboard on which I had taped a number of posters showing nozzle calculations, the parabolic trajectory of our rockets, and the trigonometry we had used to calculate altitudes. I also had drawings of the nozzles and casements and how they worked. Werner von Braun's autographed photograph sat in a place of honor, and in front, lying down, was the AUK 25 casement. Beside it was one of the nozzles that Mr. Caton had surreptitiously built. It was a beautiful construction, the intricate curves glowing silvery in the light. We made a quick audit of our competition. A Welch High School display of plant fossils found in coal mines seemed our stiffest competition. "Just a bunch of old rocks," Odell said. "Nothing to worry about." I wasn't so certain. Each fossilized plant was identified, and there was also a chart showing the evolution of plants from the dinosaurs to the present day. I thought it was a good job, and I suspected the judges would think so too. The Pocahontas Industrial Council for Education was the sponsoring organization, a committee created by the businesses in Welch and some of the larger coal mines. Odell said that the judges were Welch courthouse politicians, whatever that meant. There were 6 of them, and they came and stood in a little semicircle around me when it was my turn. They each carried a clipboard. "Which high school are you from, son?" "Big Creek, sir, Mrs. Riley's physics class." One of them squinted at a casement. "You ever blow anything up?" I thought about Mom's rose-guarded fence and mentally crossed my fingers. "We tend to be careful, sir." "Didn't you set that forest fire over at Davy?" "No, sir, that was an airplane flare." "What's that?" another judge asked, pointing at the nozzle, and I got my chance to expound on what it was for, how its dimensions were calculated and what it did. A judge peered at Von Braun's photo. "I read about you in that grocery store newspaper. Sounds like you boys do some crazy stuff," he added. "How high will it fly?" another said, pointing at AUK 25. I think around 3 miles, I said, and then explained how I made that judgment and how we'd measure it when the time came. The 6 men rocked on their heels and looked at one another and all hummed at the same time. Looks to me like this could really be dangerous. We're at the top of page 372, said the one who had already called us crazy. He frowned, wrote something down, and then went off to look at the other displays. Those morons won't let you win, Odell griped, coming out from behind the display. Not after you said you were from Big Creek. Looks to me like this could be really dangerous, Quentin muttered. Like, what isn't in the pursuit of science? At that point, I was just happy to have it over with. I had done the best I could. Mom took us all to lunch at the Flatiron drugstore. When we returned, the judges were waiting for me in front of my display. The lead judge shook my hand and handed me a blue ribbon. Congratulations, Mr. Hickam, he said. Looks like you're going to Bluefield for the area finals. So make that note. Remember, the other boys, Odell, he didn't think they had a chance because the judges were from Welch. But look who won the blue ribbon. I knew we'd win, Odell yelled. Wasn't Odell the one that said he didn't think they would? And took the ribbon out of my hand and to the amusement of the judges did a little jig. Mom stood to one side, a pleased, proud smile on her face. She hugged Quentin when he came over to her. I was still trying to accept what had happened. I couldn't entirely believe it. We'd won. I couldn't wait to tell Miss Riley and Dad. Dad was up at the mine all that evening inside working with his foreman doing safety inspections. Mom said she'd tell him for the first thing in the morning. As soon as I got off the school bus, I headed for Miss Riley's classroom. She was at her desk. When I told her we'd won, she gave me a big happy grin and sent a runner to tell Mr. Turner. The principal tracked me down in history class and ordered me out into the hall. He stared at me. I just made $5 off the county superintendent, he said, nearly grinning. When's the next contest? I told him the area finals in Bluefield were to take place in 2 weeks. Gotta get my bet in, he said, and went at a near trot back toward his office. Boy, has Mr. Turner changed, right? So I'd make a note of that he confronts him, and he's obviously proud of him and says he won the $5 from Welch's principal. The win at the county science fair made us a little more famous. The Coalwood Women's Club invited us to speak at their monthly meeting in the room above the post office. All our grade school teachers were there, of course. They beamed with pride. Quentin and I did most of the talking, boisterously proclaiming how difficult the calculations were and describing how our rockets flew. The ladies breathlessly applauded us. We were next invited to the Kiwanis Club in War and were a hit there as well. The president of the club gave us a speaker's certificate and proclaimed us the pride of the Hollows. Mom and Dad left for Myrtle Beach the following Friday, and I had the house to myself. It was also the weekend of the junior-senior prom. With the Buick gone, Uncle Clarence agreed to let me use his car. I had asked Melba June, the junior that I danced with at the Christmas formal, to be my date, and she had jumped into my arms right there in the auditorium. I saw Dorothy sitting alone watching us. She looked away quickly. Dorothy had a new boyfriend, Roy Lee said, another college guy, but he also said things weren't working out. I made it a special point not to care. I think he's over her. We scheduled a rocket launch on the same day as the prom. Basil's effusive prose summoned our audience. So remember, he's talking about Basil Oglethorpe, the one that writes in the paper. And here is what he writes. The BCMA will be launching from their Cape Coalwood this Saturday. It is a thing of glory to see, all right. Your reporter has already posted their adventures in this space, but it is worth repeating that just about anything can happen at one of their blast-offs. As witness the one where 2 of our intrepid boys crept out under the cover of swiftly manufactured armor. The people gathered on the road as usual. So now we are on 374 and we are at their launch of 25. The people gathered on the road as usual, except this time I noticed they were separated into Union and Company families, each keeping an icy distance. We ran up our flag and launched. AUK 25 peeked out. And launched. I need to finish the sentence there. AUK 25 peeked out at the predicted 15,000 feet. 15,000, guys. Neatly falling down range, landing with a solid thump near the end of the slack. So mark that. AUK 25, 15,000. The impact bit the casement and shattered the wooden nose cone. I decided to line the interior of the nozzle with a veneer of water putty, an inspiration that I hoped would act as an ablative heat sink. It had worked as I hoped, the only erosion, just a few BB-sized pits right past the throat. Quentin peered at it and put his hand on my shoulder. Prodigious, Sonny, prodigious. He looked at me with heightened respect. You know, every so often I think you really are a rocket boy. An orchid corsage in hand, I picked up Melba June, and together we strolled into the Big Creek High School gymnasium. A proud couple. We danced nearly every dance. To my disappointment, Dorothy didn't show. When I took Melba June home, we fogged up the windows good in the mercury before she gave me a final adoring kiss and skipped up to her porch, where her parents patiently and secretly waited for her to finish smooching the great rocket scientist and science fair winner. They opened the front door the moment her dainty little foot touched the first step. That's a girl's parents for you guys. That's the way my dad would have been. Mom and Dad got back late on Monday after I'd gone to bed. When I came in from school on Tuesday, I found Mom humming around with a contented little smile on her face, and Dad in the basement poking into the dark corners of the junk down there, whistling. I had never heard him whistle before, didn't even know that he knew how. Your dad's quitting, Mom told me when I questioned his behavior. He's going into real estate at Myrtle Beach. We're moving as soon as you go to college this fall. We're figuring out what we'll take and what we'll leave behind. Look how happy Mom is. So make a note of that. She says Dad's going to quit and they're moving to Myrtle Beach and he's going to sell real estate. But then look at the next paragraph. Mom must have seen the doubt cross my face because she rushed to assure me. He really means it, Sonny. He's had enough. Mr. Butler said he could go in business with him. That part sounded right. Mr. Butler had been an engineer with a company and then quit to open up a realty business in Myrtle Beach. Dad came bounding up the stairs, 2 at a time, as excited as any time I'd ever seen him, with the possible exception of when the West Virginia coaches came to see Jim. I don't think we need a thing down there, he said of the basement. We can even leave the washer. Sonny's almost worn out the top of it anyway. We'll buy everything new at the beach. To my astonishment, he hugged her. He's kind of enjoying this. I went down to my lab to mix up some more propellant. Daisy May made an appearance and climbed up on the counter to watch me work. She started rubbing my arm. I patted her absently, but I was too busy to really pay her any mind. After a while, she gave up, got down, and demanded to be let out. Glad to be rid of the distraction, I opened the door for her. Later, I went up to my room to do my homework. I was feeling a little sick to my stomach, and my head ached too. There was so much to do to get ready for the area fair in Bluefield. I thought about stretching out on the bed, but I remembered Daisy May was outside, and part of the relaxation was having her curl up beside me. I buckled down to a solid geometry problem until I heard a screech of tires that seemed to begin opposite the service station all the way past our house. Whoever it was in a big hurry. I dug into the problem again. I heard the storm door slam shut and words between Mom and Dad. I have to tell Sonny, I heard Mom say, and I knew exactly what had happened. I came without being called. Mom waited for me in the foyer, holding my little cat in her arms. Daisy May's body was turned awkwardly, her fluffy little feet limp. Her head was lying on Mom's chest, and her eyes were half open. There was a trickle of blood coming from her mouth. Oh, it makes me sad. I forgot. I read that like a while back, but I forgot. I could get no closer. A storm of emotion came out of nowhere and engulfed me. Y'all, I don't even like cats, and this makes me sad. My eyes went in focus, and my mind felt as if it were being sucked down into a whirlpool of red and white swirling blotches. I sat down the stairs hard and stared ahead. I let her out was the first rational thought I had. I let her out. I killed her. Don't laugh at me, guys. Mrs. Sheretz appeared from next door, somehow aware of what had happened. He's okay, Elsie, she kept saying. He's okay. I blinked back to reality, suddenly aware of everything. I got up and ran upstairs and into the bathroom and started to puke. I thought I would never stop. When at last I felt like I could move again, I came unsteadily down the stairs. The house was deathly quiet. I found Mom alone on the back porch sitting in a chair. She had Daisy May in a shoebox on her lap. How many cats had we buried over the years in shoebox coffins? Always before, Jim and I had carried them into the mountains to bury them and to give them their last rites, a prayer over a wooden cross of birch twigs and twine. For the first time, I missed Jim, missed his strength, his ability to focus on nothing but the task at hand. I went down into the basement, and I got a shovel, and I came back to the porch. I guess this just reminds me of my dog when we had to bury her a year ago. Mom let me take the box, saying nothing. I set it gently under the apple tree in the backyard and began to dig. Dad came out of the house and stood and watched me, and then he left in the Buick, destination unknown. Dandy and Petite sat nearby, shivering and quiet except for an intermittent whimper. Mom came outside and watched me silently. When I finished burying Daisy Mae, I looked up and all the boys except Quentin were there, called by the invisible network that still seemed to connect everybody in Colwood. Just talking about all the women that would kind of talk across the fence. The boys followed me up to my room and watched me as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring, unseeing at the far wall. Roy Lee said, "I'll find out who did this, Sonny, and he'll pay for it, I promise you." Roy Lee was talking about who had hit Daisy Mae. Until that moment, I thought it had been an accident, but then I realized I had heard those tires squealing once before. Whoever had shot at Dad had murdered Daisy Mae. I nodded, unable to do more. What did it matter now, anyway? Daisy Mae was gone. I had years yet to live, and I missed her already. So do make note that Daisy Mae was hit by a car, but that Sonny's suspicious since he heard tires squeal off. I got through my classes during the next week in a haze. Roy Lee drove us to Bluefield for the fair, and together we set up the panels and the displays. Once more I submitted myself to the judges while the other boys hovered nearby. I gave a little speech and then my answers to their questions, hardly caring whether I won or not. We returned after lunch for the presentations. The third prize and then the second prize were announced. I felt my stomach twinge. Oh gosh, please no, I thought. We weren't going to win anything. What an embarrassment to go back to Big Creek with nothing. What do you guys think? As soon as we'd gotten outside our little county, we'd been a complete and utter failure. Remember, they're at the Bluefield County Fair now. The head judge stood up and leaned on the podium. First prize goes to, and this is a first for this high school, ladies and gentlemen, Big Creek High School. So make a note of that, guys. Represented by Homer Hadley Hickam Jr. for a study of amateur rocketry techniques. Quentin couldn't contain himself. He jumped up and yelled, "Woohoo!" before subsiding in embarrassment. Odell danced around with both his hands in the air like a victorious boxer. Roy Lee cackled and then slugged me hard on my arm. Sherman laughed and clapped his hands. Billy sat back in his chair, wiping his forehead in relief. The auditorium burst into applause. I just sat there with a big silly grin on my face. I couldn't believe it. We'd won. We were going to the National Science Fair. Make a note. I told you, Quentin kept saying to me over and over. When things settled down, we got yet another award. And I would mark this. An Air Force major stood and announced that we had earned a first prize certificate for being outstanding in the field of propulsion. So mark that. First prize certificate for being outstanding in the field of propulsion. He talked about our exhibit, saying it contained the most sophisticated rockets he'd seen this side of Cape Canaveral. You've got that right, Major? Odell brayed. After the presentations were over, the Major came by to shake my hand. He said he hoped I'd consider the Air Force as a career. I had the other boys come over, and when I introduced them, he beamed and said, "The United States Air Force would love to have each and every one of you." He had apparently not noticed Sherman's shriveled leg or Quentin's doubtful slouch. It was raining as we drove home through the twisting valleys and the coal-smeared towns of Mercer and McDowell counties. The mines alongside the road were so quiet and empty they looked as if they'd been abandoned for 1,000 years. A bus passed us. Hubert Humphrey for president was emblazoned on its side. It sent back a dirty spray that splashed across the windshield. Roy Lee eased up on the accelerator a bit. A few miles farther down the road, the bus that had passed us with such alarm had stopped. Somebody was out of it, waving his hat at a tiny gathering. I was feeling sick to my stomach again, and my head felt like it was splitting. Roy Lee stopped to let me go throw up, and when I came back from the ditch, the other boys had climbed up on a stone wall. Hubert Humphrey was a rotund little man, whose jaw and arms seemed to be connected by a string. The more he waved his arms, the faster his mouth seemed to move. He was on a tear, promising the crowd if he got to be president, the government was going to come in and set everything right, even run things if it had to. Sounds like we're hearing a little bit of that going on right now. No one would ever go hungry if he was president. No sirree. And nobody would lack for a job either. Let's ask him a question about space, Sherman suggested, and he waved his hand at him, but Humphrey never looked his way. He was still talking when Roy Lee guided his car past the bus and then sped up, slowly only to make his way through the little town of Keystone, the streets empty except for a mangy dog picking around the front of an abandoned store. Mr. Turner called me to his office the following Monday to shake my hand. "You've surpassed all my expectations, my boy," he said. "I'm going to call an assembly. We're going to give you a proper send-off to Indianapolis." During the assembly, so make a note of that Mr. Turner is going to announce that they are going to be going to the next fair, which is in Indianapolis. During the assembly, all the members of the BCMA got to stand up and take a bow. Mr. Turner called me up front. "I'll do my best to represent Big Creek," I said, frowning into the stage lights and trying to ignore my splitting head. I was still having bouts of nausea and now headaches. Miss Riley stood and said, "This just goes to show that Big Creek students can do just about anything they want to do. I know Sonny is going to make us even more proud in Indianapolis." Seeing Miss Riley so positive and hopeful made me ashamed and disgusted with my symptoms. I was just being a weak sister. So, of course, what he means is, here he's all acting sick and nauseous when Miss Riley really has a reason to, we know. That night I was drawn to my backyard by some undefinable need. All was quiet there in the dark, save the rustling of the leaves in the apple tree, barely stirred by a gentle wind. I walked deep into the yard beyond the light from the kitchen window and stood very still, scarcely breathing, wondering why I was there, hoping something inside me would give me the answer. The night air was so clear that when I looked up, the stars seemed to form a glowing blue-white bridge that arched from mountain to mountain. I stood enthralled, letting my mind wander happily down the starry trail until my attention was drawn to the fence, where I was surprised to see someone standing there looking my way. As dark as it was, I recognized him just by the way he tilted his head. "Roy Lee," I called. "What are you doing there?" "I was looking out my window and saw you come out into the yard," he said. "I've been meaning to talk to you, but I wanted it to be kind of private like, you know. Guess this old backyard is as private as it gets in Colwood." I waited while Roy Lee leaned on the fence and had a bout of general fidgeting, clearing his throat, squinting, running his hand through his hair, and so forth. Whatever he had to say, he didn't much want to say it. "Roy Lee, what?" I finally demanded. "I found out what happened to her." He nodded toward the apple tree, and I realized he was talking about Daisy May. "I found out who killed her, like I promised I would." I came over to the fence. "Who was it?" I hissed, ready to commit murder. "Pookie, right?" "No, but it was one of those blamed idiots who follows him around. Pookie most likely put him up to it." As mad as I was at Pookie, I surprised myself by thinking first of Calvin. Calvin had been mean to me his whole life, but I had come to see him in a different light, since he had helped me by finding my rocket stuff. Still, if Pookie had sentenced Daisy May to die, I couldn't forgive him, even for Calvin's sake. "I have to do something, Roy Lee," I said. "I can't let him get away with this." "You don't have to do anything, Sonny," Roy Lee said. "Pookie's left town." The way I heard it, Calvin tried to keep Pookie from beating up his ma and got smacked pretty hard. The neighbors called Tag, and Tag came right up, kicked in the door, and threw Pookie in the creek. Tag told him if he ever saw Pookie's face in Colwood again, next time he'd throw him down the mine shaft. Pookie couldn't get away fast enough. Tag was that mad. What about Calvin and his mother? The widow Clowers up in 6 took them in until Calvin graduates and goes into the Army. "And what about the man who ran over Daisy May?" I asked. Roy Lee twitched some more, turning finally to look up at the dark mountains. The lights from the gas station burnished his sleek black hairdo. "I'd tell you his name, Sonny, if you made me, but the way I heard it, he's real sorry now that he did it." "You want to know?" So I would make a note that Pookie has been run out of town, basically, for attacking his mom, and that Calvin and his mom are now staying in someone else's house until Calvin goes into the army. I considered it and then shook my head. What good would it do for me to go around sharing the same town with someone I hated? I just didn't see the sense of it. Anyway, I figured the man who killed Daisy May would eventually get his due without any help from me. Justice, after all, had finally come to Pookie. Colwood justice. It seemed as if the town had a way of eventually settling everything if only one was patient enough to let things sort themselves out. That's some wise wisdom, you know. So many times people want to get revenge like right away for something happens. Sometimes just give it some time. And not always, but a lot of times people do get justice for what they do. Thank you for telling me, Roy Lee, I said, and all of a sudden I realized how much he meant to me. I found myself wanting to say that I hoped Roy Lee would always be my friend and that I could be his no matter what happened to us or where we went out or how far apart we were. I settled for hitting him on the shoulder and then letting him hit me. A good balled fist to the shoulder that hurt. That said everything I wanted to say without letting the words get in the way of it anyway. I said goodnight to Roy Lee and moved away from the fence and walked to the apple tree, wanting to be near Daisy May. I knelt and patted her grave. Taking a handful of soil from it, I would put it in a fruit jar and take it to Indianapolis with me. Standing, I took a deep breath of mountain air, and then I knew something else. Mr. Dubonnet had been right that day years ago by the old railroad track, when he said I had been born in the mountains and that's where I belonged, no matter what I did or where I went. I didn't understand him then, but now I did. Colwood, its people, and the mountains were a part of me, and I was a part of them, and always would be. I would make a note about that. You know, he takes the dirt with him. He's taking it with him wherever he goes. And it's always going to be that way. It's kind of like my dad when he met my mom. He was from Mississippi, moved away, of course, came here. But, you know, he always loved Mississippi and always liked returning home. So never forget your home. Never forget it. I also remembered that night when Dad had come back from Cleveland and we had argued in my room. I had gone to my window after he'd left and looked out, envying the men I saw going to and from the mine because they knew exactly who they were and what they were doing. Standing under the apple tree where Daisy May was buried, I realized I didn't have to envy them anymore. I also knew now who I was and what I was going to do. That was when, almost as if someone had pulled a string, my stomach and my head stopped hurting. So Homer, or Sonny, that's what we call him, knows who he is and what he's going to do now, guys. I would make note of that. It's a very good chapter. Again, a lot of things happened in this chapter. So I hope you have a good night, and we will be back next time to read chapter 24. Thanks.